Welcome to the Cinematologists podcast. My name is Dario Linares, and down the line, of course, is Neil Fox. Neil, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, mate, thanks. Yeah, I'm on my eternal quest to find a decent room in the university to record audio in. And the latest one's a bit echoey and has a big drip just outside the window. So the hunt continues. How are you doing?
Yes. I've been better, I must say. I spent the entire weekend with a migraine and toothache, and last night I've got the beginnings of a cold coming on, and I got this trip to Aesthetica this week and guest lectures tomorrow, so just exactly what you want. I think what happened was on Friday, Saturday, I realised I could have a couple of days off, like properly off, and my body just went, screw you, there you go, I'm going to relax now and all the germs will come out, which is I think a theory that many academics hold about the way that the body operates during term time.
I think it's a general life theory, isn't it? You know, like particularly people who do prolonged periods of work that kind of fluctuates. You know, that sense of, the body knows it's got to hold on until a certain point and then takes any window to recover. I think is I imagine that's quite common across a lot of disciplines, but certainly the end of a term is one of all the toxins leaving the body before any kind of relaxation could start.
Yeah, and I was kind of hoping I might sound like Sam Elliott for this episode, but I'd sound more like Elmer Fudd, I think. So let's try and work our way through that. But we've got an episode that was much vaunted over our last few episodes. We've been telling people about it, and it's finally here. So today we're gonna talk about Speed.
We are, yeah. It has been long in the ether. We've been teasing it and tantalising it, hopefully, for our listeners. But we recorded this episode in terms of the live audience audio back in September for Freshers Week at Falmouth University for the film course. And it was great fun, a great kind of start to the academic year. And hopefully people will enjoy what myself and my colleague, Dr Verena Von Eicken, and our audience talked about.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. It's a really, really interesting discussion. And I think also it sort of ties into some of the stuff that we've kind of been talking a little bit about and is just, being talked about everywhere in terms of, where action movies sit in today's kind of filmmaking climate. I'm trying to finish off the newsletter for our Patreon subscribers. So if you want to read that, then go to our Patreon page. But I'm just doing a little overview of the whole discussion about cinema as theme park rides and whether it is cinema or not. I've sort of waded into that in a very, kind of a superficial way, because obviously I don't want to go off on one too much in the newsletter. But I think it's an interesting analogy and just posing the question of whether it actually works or not. But I think Speed is very interesting because it is an action film that is sort of pure action. And again, we'll get into this later on, but I think it still does work because it does that pure action so well. And therefore you don't really have to worry about maybe deeper context that you might do if you were watching a different kind of movie. And whether today's films actually manage to get that pure action anymore, I don't know, is a question maybe we can talk about.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting to talk about. Certainly whether it's achievable at that level, I think, is another thing. But you've been watching a few bits and pieces recently. What's been on your radar? Yeah,
well, I saw your tweet about Dolomite, and it was like I saw it on the Netflix, advertising and the front page. I thought, Eddie Murphy film, comedy. You'd like to think, that's good, but you get burned so many times, I think, by people who back in the day, talking about 80s action movies, Eddie Murphy made films that you would consider action movies, but obviously he's most recognised as a comedic star, and you just think how good he was in the sort of mid to late 80s and kind of what he became, what it turned him into in a sense. So when a film sort of arrives like that, and I didn't really read much about it, and I saw your tweet about it, I was like, oh Jesus, that's high praise indeed. That'll be interesting to watch. And I put it on, and B came in from the next room and she says, what are you laughing at? And I says, it's this film with Eddie Murphy, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's so funny. And she was like, you're just giggling to yourself all the way through. And it's one of those movies that it just completely and utterly took me by surprise in terms of the writing, in terms of how it was knowing, but in a smart way, not just kind of like, oh, I'm so hip and postmodern. And it was about, it's about sort of being a struggling artist, and there's obviously sort of parallels, I think, with Eddie Murphy's career in certain ways, and it's just, it's imminently quotable, but then you realise you're a 45-year-old white man and you think you better not go there. It's just, absolutely one of the funniest things I've seen. And we had that episode on comedy films, and I told you that, I'm not so much a fan now of out-and-out comedies anymore. I like comedy performances within sort of drama situations or other kinds of situations rather than the sort of on-the-nose comedy. And this just does both, I think. It has an amazing sort of reverence for earlier films that are about the process of filmmaking and trying to get films made, on zero budget, and the stuff, as you mentioned, the sort of relationships to Ed Wood, and I saw a lot of Bowfinger in it. And, again, just looking at the writers and their background, again, it's not exactly my cup of tea, but I just think that this hits the mark. And Eddie Murphy is the best thing I've seen him do since God knows when.
Yeah, I think since Bowfinger. I've been following the film for a while because I follow Larry Karaszewski, one of the writers, on social media. So I knew that they were making this film, and it was really exciting because of him and Scott Alexander, who he writes with. Because, like you say, they wrote Ed Wood, they wrote The People versus Larry Flint, The People versus O.J. Simpson, all things I really, really love, and do that thing that you're talking about there, which is manage to be really, really funny, but also moving, poignant, dramatic, kind of interesting. Really, really, you feel the research in a kind of really good way. So they're kind of some of my favourite screenwriters. So I was excited for this, and obviously kind of interested to see Eddie Murphy come back, and
Wesley Snipes,
who's
brilliant,
who's great in it, really great. But even though I was kind of interested and excited to see it, it still kind of floored me just how good it was, because I just thought that this is just amazingly funny and kind of inspirational. Just the perseverance, and I think it's interesting sort of saying like you might not be able to quote it as a man of your white man in your mid-40s, but I thought there was a lot of resonance for older people who are kind of told a lot that what they do isn't real or waste of time or whatever, and kind of the perseverance of thinking no, there's a space for me in this world and I'm going to find it, and just the kind of the ingenuity of it. And then as he kind of starts this endeavor to make his own films, very much Ed Wood style, he just such imagination and such defiance. It was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, it's definitely one of the best things I've seen this year.
And it's clever. It's clever on race as well. I mean, when they get the white kids in from film school, and he comes in and introduces himself as Nick von Sternberg. I nearly fell off my chair when he said that. It was so funny. But that kind of idea that the guy knew, he wasn't naive to have this kind of idealized vision. He knew that that's what the game was. And in order to get his film made, it was kind of like, we need these guys in there. And it wasn't kind of like a perfect scenario by any means, but it's sort of making a comment about the inequalities of the system. But I'm going to make this compromise to get my film made.
Yeah, and also interesting in terms of race, in terms of like within the black community, when he goes to see the distributor of the Shaft movies, and when he goes to see the playwright who wants to be like this really kind of important playwright,
experimental 1970s theatre and all that.
But he kind of gets drawn into this world just by the energy and enthusiasm of it. But there's lots of it wasn't one note at all. It was really really sort of layered and massive fun. So well recommended. Yeah, definitely well recommended. And the other thing I saw, which we were looking, it was funny because we were looking for a Saturday night film, and we actually planned to watch The Irishman, but we thought I thought it was on Netflix already, but it wasn't, so that went out the window. And we thought, let's watch King of Comedy, and B hadn't seen it before, and we watched that, and it just drew me in again right from the beginning. And I'd forgotten how, one of the things I'd forgotten was how smart the editing is. Whereas, obviously, we had the bonus episode where we talked about Joker and that sense of not really knowing, not knowing what he's imagining or what he's creating in his own head. And in Joker, it kind of tells you at the end. But in the King of Comedy, it's done in such a smart way where it's relying on the audience to kind of work to understand that there are crossovers here. Some are imagined, some are not. And even then, at times, it's not letting you settle on one or the other at certain moments. It's great.
even Sandra Bernhard is just hilarious. And that moment where great editing, where it cuts between two scenes of her doing that really crazy seduction of Jerry Langford, and then cutting to Robert De Niro, who's obviously kidnapped him and is now trying to get on TV, and this TV moment. So there's two moments of absolute craziness in different ways. And the effect of stardom is just absolutely brilliantly done. I mean, I know that I think you're on this page where people talk about Mean Streets and Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and all that. King of Comedy is up there in that sort of list of what's Scorsese's best.
Yeah, no, I think I would definitely put that in my top tier Scorsese. A film that long been a champion of, simply because I think it kind of feels like Taxi Driver in terms of its complexity and its portrayals of kind of obsession and how obsession builds.
Yeah.
But it's, as we sort of talked about on the comedy episode, that just having that comedy aspect to it, which is a kind of deranged comedy from Pupkin, and obviously, and having Jerry Lewis in there and his kind of shtick as the host is kind of makes people feel like it's not doing the same thing as Taxi Driver, which is so overtly serious, I think. But I'm glad to see that it's kind of grown in stature and people have found it. And it's also been one of the benefits of Joker has been the increased kind of focus on that as a film in the conversation, which is very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Something to kind of go back to, I think, in terms of that oeuvre. Just remembering how seminal a filmmaker Scorsese was. I mean, to be honest with you, I'd rather just go back, watch the films, rather than deal with some of the other stuff that gets talked about, because that's all clickbait, even though I'm written a little bit about it now for the newsletter. But do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, whatever, have your conversations. King of Comedy is still a masterpiece.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of cancelling Scorsese is just idiotic, because then you wouldn't have Joker in the first place. So what are you going to do about that? Yeah, talking about oeuvres and kind of going back to it, I wanted to flag up a film which is playing at the Dock and Roll Film Festival, which is running at the moment in London. So it runs till the middle of November.
Cool.
And it's David Crosby, Remember My Name. So David Crosby was kind of singer and musician from The Byrds and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And it's Cameron Crowe produced this film, and he does the interview that kind of sits at the centre of it. And it's one of those things, I've never really been a massive Crosby fan, but the film is really beautiful and really took me by surprise. It's kind of painfully honest. This is someone who had a reputation for being difficult and was an addict and was in prison and fell out with a lot of people. And the film makes no attempts to kind of create a hagiography about that. He is very honest about his part in all of his troubles and how people like Neil Young and Roger McGuinn from The Byrds just won't talk to him at all. And it's really sad, really moving. And the last third is him kind of reckoning with a life of bad decisions, which is at odds with this incredible body of work as a musician. It's a kind of level of reflection you rarely see, and really made me kind of think twice about him as a person by the end of it, which was great. And the archive footage is fantastic, as you'd expect from that, from that particular 70s Laurel Canyon period. And what's also lovely is how much time he gives sort of talking about how great other people are. So there's a whole section on Joni Mitchell where he basically, just eulogises about her for, sort of 10 minutes. And it's, remarkable time given over in a documentary to someone else. So I've written a piece about it and a couple of other films that are showing up on the Quietus. But if you're in London and you like music docs over the next couple of weeks, check out Dock and Roll, definitely.
Do you know where it's playing?
All different venues, yeah. Picture House Central and
Cool.
and places like that. So yeah, check the website, as they like to say.
No worries at all. Awesome. So I suppose let's move into the main body of the podcast. So obviously you gave us a précis there of the reasons for screening it. I think it's a great choice, particularly because it does. I mean, you talk about this on the tape, on the live tape, about it being somehow ground zero for a shift in action movies. And is that something you'd kind of thought about before, or was that a sort of thing that kind of came to you when you were talking with Verena, or in the build up to the film?
A little bit in the build up. I think what was obvious to me, having seen it when it was released, and kind of being a fan of action movies, was it felt very different. It felt significant in a way that at the time I probably wouldn't have been able to articulate. And I'm not sure that the thesis necessarily holds kind of 100%, but it definitely feels like the start of something different for action movies. And I think particularly in regard to Keanu, I think a lot of it's in the casting, because I think that you could have made that film with Bruce Willis, and it still might have done as well, because the premise is so strong, and but the feeling of watching it, I think, would be very different. I think, and it signifies a shift into a different relationship between audiences and action stars. And it's the period where the kind of leads us to where we are now, which is a kind of 30 years of different types of action heroes, which kind of sit very much kind of in opposition to, but certainly in tension with the previous sort of 20 years, from sort of Ford through particularly Schwarzenegger, Stallone and Lundgren, and that kind of 80s B movie, prestige B movies that were very popular.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think that there is a sort of there are kind of like parallel trends for me in action cinema, particularly going back to the 80s when I was growing up, because I think obviously that there are films where action is central and paramount well before the 80s, of course, throughout the history of cinema. But I think that there's that sense of high concept action is something that's tied to the 1980s. But I also think that there is a sort of legacy that goes back through Speed that is different from the kind of hard body action heroes that that are associated with that book by, I think it's Von Tasker, isn't it? Who wrote that book? I think. Oh, Susan Jeffords wrote. Let's get that right. Susan Jeffords wrote Hard Bodies. Von Tasker wrote Spectacular Bodies, I think, if I remember rightly. But I think just going back through my sort of interest in action films, and again sort of pulling out that parallel. So things like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then Aliens and Lethal Weapon, and those kinds of movies, I think, also are slightly aside, because I think Harrison Ford and Mel Gibson, they do have more in common with Keanu in terms of their positioning as the sort of male hero. Now, maybe slightly different in terms of like some of those films that they've got that kind of outsider maverick. It's just that man against the system kind of thing going on. Which is different, I think, like you say, in terms of Speed, where he's on the bus and he's kind of like becomes a kind of man of the people. He's definitely not that indestructible Rambo Schwarzenegger type character. But I do think that there is a sort of lineage in terms of the way that the action hero is defined within cinema that is outside of those huge muscular action stars. And also I think in terms of the structure of the film, I think does owe a lot to something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I can't remember where I read this, but it was kind of like the film that, rather than Star Wars and rather than Jaws, it was the film that, and I can't remember who said this, that first had this structure of set piece, run around a lot, set piece, run around a lot, set piece. Do you know what I mean? Stop to explain a bit of plot, set piece. And it's just, the structure of the film is designed around these set pieces, and everything else in between is designed to get you onto the next set piece. And I think that maybe Speed in a slightly different way does do that, but it's an interesting conversation of where Speed sits in that lineage, I think. Sorry, that was going on a bit.
No, I think it's important to say, and it's great, because obviously one of the reasons that kind of picking a film like Speed is trying to get to the kind of the crux of where it sits, and is it of value, and what is its value, and where does it kind of sit in that sense,
Yeah.
For me, it was a very exciting and kind of pleasurable and formative experience at the cinema seeing it. But is my relationship to it kind of subjective because of the spectacle, or does it have something else of note? And I think it's interesting to hear you sort of mention the likes of kind of Mel Gibson and Harrison Ford and stuff. And I guess that they are not the traditional. They're almost more kind of classic Hollywood, kind of wisecracking, charming, slightly very mischievous, kind of on the edge kind of characters, which Reeves's character in Speed, and then later something like Bourne or something like, is just the kind of the antithesis of that. It's kind of like there is no personality. You see a little bit in the terms of the relationship with his partner in Speed, but he's not. He's just, this is his job. He is very much like, he's not a Riggs, and he's not, so I think that seems like a shift as well away from, which I think is what Keanu again does with the performances. He brings it into focusing on the plot and the mechanics of the plot much more than the personality. You end up rooting for the situation to be resolved, and this relationship with Sandra Bullock, this chemistry to be kind of realised, than kind of cheering the hero in that kind of traditional way, which I think that felt very much like a shift. And I would argue as well is a kind of a moment where cinema starts to move way more into other things than the star, and I think we might talk a little bit about where action cinema is located. And when you think about superhero movies and blockbusters, which are essentially the action movies of today on that scale, they're not about stars, they're about situations and characters in situations and the resolution of situations before another situation presents itself, which I think is and maybe that's traceable back to things like, you say, Aliens and Raiders of the Lost Ark, which are genre movies, in a way that Speed, the genre is action, whereas which I think is fascinating in itself.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good place for us to maybe move into the recording of Speed at the Poly in Falmouth with myself and Verena Von Eicken, and then our lovely audience. Hello, welcome to the Cinematologists podcast. Thanks for joining us, and thank you very much to my colleague, Dr Verena Von Eicken, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
So this is the first screening of the new season, and it's the Keanu Reeves starring 1994 Jan de Bont classic Speed. And when I said we were screening Speed, you were quite excited. Do you want to sort of share why? Is it a film that you'd seen, or why did you think, I've got to do this?
Yes, I've seen Speed several times. It's one of my kind of favourite kind of Saturday evening entertainment type films. So I think it's not dated. It's aged very well. It's still as enjoyable, I think, as it was 25 years ago when it first came out. But I think there's also more to it that we might not pick up on first viewing. So or things that we can think about when we watch the film in context of what did it mean for the action genre, so to speak. Was it maybe a bit of a turning point in terms of how the action hero is portrayed? Is it kind of projecting forwards to films like the Bourne franchise, or Mission Impossible, and so on and so forth? How is the setup with a villain basically blowing things up in a kind of in an urban centre before 2001? How is that portrayed, and so on and so forth? So I think there's hopefully more to it than just having a good kind of Saturday night entertainment,
which is always necessary.
Yes.
But I think that's one of the reasons that I was interested in screening it as well, particularly this one, because it's like a lot of comedies, action movies are kind of considered just entertainment, and I thought for a good introduction to students kind of about to embark on a film studies course, it's a good film to see, well, how do we think about this other than just as entertainment? What are the ways into talking about this film that are kind of cultural, contextual, political, based on gender and things like that? So, and it was, I remember when this film came out in the cinema, I saw this at the cinema, and it's 25 years old, which I didn't realise until I was working on a film festival looking at kind of anniversary screenings, thinking, what kind of events could you sort of tie in? And then I was like, wow, Speed was... And then I instantly went back to remember when I saw it, which was in the States, and that was a big summer. That was True Lies, which I think people, like True Lies and Speed came out within weeks of each other. And that really is the old and the new, like the kind of the Planet Hollywood, which is probably a reference that people still don't... You probably don't know that, or you might do, that Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis and Sly Stallone had a restaurant called Planet Hollywood, which was a kind of global Hard Rock Cafe kind of franchise, and they were the very awkward kind of faces of that, and that was a really weird time. That was they were huge, aggressive celebrity stars, and then and True Lies is a hugely bombastic film, and then at the same time you've got Speed, which just felt so different. And Keanu, it was a moment for Keanu, and it was a moment for action movies, and I was someone who really enjoyed Keanu in his pre-Speed days, and it felt like a huge leap that he was going to go and not just not just make an action movie, but be the star of an action movie, which I think is like how we're going to sort of set the film up as in terms of that Keanu moment.
Yeah, exactly. So now, obviously, you might associate Keanu Reeves with John Wick. It was very much kind of a very well-known, bankable star, but Speed was kind of his breakthrough film. That it was his first lead role. Previously, he had been playing supporting roles or kind of a co-lead in Point Break in 1991 with Patrick Swayze. So it's interesting to look at how his character is portrayed in the film. It's an interesting thing to think about. As you were saying, True Lies came out the same year. That was Arnold Schwarzenegger. So whereas you have in the 1980s, you have this really muscly, butch, cold, callous, kind of tough, muscular action star, Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's interesting to think about how Keanu Reeves' character in Speed is possibly a bit different, and how he's kind of engages with his co-stars, the other characters in the film, kind of slightly differently, and how that then changed the face of the action star kind of in the years going forward. So I think that's one thing to look out for, I think, when we're watching the film.
Yeah, because I think, like you say, that John Wick's a great kind of endpoint, isn't it? In terms of well, not endpoint, but in terms of where we are now. But tracing it back to this moment, and then in the middle of that, you have something like The Matrix. And it wasn't a surprise when Keanu Reeves took The Matrix, and largely because if you'd seen him in Speed, you knew that he was what he was capable of in that kind of role, and also what he would bring to that role, which I think was really. But then, if the Matrix would have come on the back of some of those early roles, which we might talk about later, that would have been
smaller indie films, dramas, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, like you say, where he's playing very strange characters.
Exactly.
And this kind of seeing a kind of strange, almost like a character actor, but a very kind of an odd presence in this kind of role did pave the way for things like Nicolas Cage and his weirdness. Something like The Rock. I mean, Con Air's he's more stereotypical, but The Rock, he's a kind of odd scientist. And then Matt Damon and, like you say, and Tom Cruise's reinvention in the Mission Impossible film. So this really feels like a ground zero moment for the contemporary action film, and hopefully people will see that. So I think we're going to leave it there because it's quite a long film, and also it's one of those things where I just want to see it. Like, I haven't seen it in a long time. I've seen it a lot. And there's something about, it's one of those films that when I know I'm going to watch it, I'm like, let's just get it watched. It's full of so much great stuff. So join us afterwards where we hope to have your responses to it. But thank you, Verena, and let's get it on. Let's watch Speed.
Enjoy.
Pop quiz, hotshot. There's a bomb on a bus. Once the bus goes 50 miles an hour, the bomb is armed. If it drops below 50, it blows up. What do you do? What do you do? He's so persistent, he always gets his man. Wouldn't be able to interest you in a bribe, would I? I've got plenty to go around. My money. You bastard! How does that feel? You like that? Huh? You like it, you bastard?
All right, thank you for staying. So tense.
It is very tense.
I've seen it how many times, and I'm just sat there on the edge. Like, the way it's constructed, it's kind of amazing. And I forgot how long it takes to get on the bus.
Really?
Yeah, that opening sequence is 30 minutes.
It's true.
You know, before you're even on the bus. And I think that's something you wouldn't necessarily see nowadays. Like, you'd have to have story, but it's all prologue. Essentially, It's all character building. It's all relationships. And it takes a long time. It's a really, really drawn out set piece. What were your thoughts on seeing it?
So on the one hand, it's as you're saying, it takes a while to get on the bus. On the other hand, it packs those three scenarios of like fast-moving, out-of-control objects into one story, into one script. So first you got your lift, then you get the bus, and then you got the underground train. And if we're talking about script and storytelling, I thought it was it was, if you think about it, it's very neatly done in the sense that there's always it's always the next thing to happen. Oh, we're out of fuel. Oh, we run over a baby. Oh, there's a gap in the road, and so on and so forth. So it's very simple, but very effectively and very well written. That immediately, as soon as one crisis is resolved, there's another challenge, another problem, another kind of added bit of tension being introduced into the story. So it's quite fabulous.
Yeah, and what's amazing is how, like, in the middle, the bus sequence, the relationship between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock builds to the point where the logic of the last 30 minutes just disappears.
Yes.
Like, none of it makes any sense in terms of like what actually happens. But you don't care because you're so invested in these characters. You're in them. Yeah. So it's like, well, we need to get to this thing. We don't worry about the storytelling logic. You're just in it. They're so good, and it's kind of a reminder of like how star power, even in a movie that's as kind of plot driven as that, can really just sort of transcend anything that's a bit like, well, how it doesn't make any sense kind of thing. Yeah, and they're so good together.
Yes, they have great chemistry together, and it's exactly like you say. It's you almost the payoff of the whole train sequence is for them to have another embrace like the one they had coming out of the bus. So so that's exactly what that's about. That's the satisfaction that you get as a viewer at the end. And
because the first one is a bit subversive, like we need the Bond moment.
Exactly.
And it's thwarted, isn't it? You think, are they deliberately thwarting it? Oh no, because we've got to do this other thing. Yeah, like say we've got to move straight on to the next one. When we were talking before, you made some really interesting points about like Keanu's role as a hero, in the fact that he doesn't really do much that a traditional hero does. Could you sort of explain a bit of that? Because I thought that was really interesting. And then rewatching it then with that in mind, I was like, oh yeah. He has a really fascinating role. Yeah,
so if you think about his character in relation to the other characters in the film, the Annie character, the other passengers on the bus, his police colleagues, there is, I think, a very strong sense that he is part of a community, of a group of people, and he depends on them as much as they depend on him. So they literally have to rescue him when he's under the bus. Annie has to give a bit of a pep talk when he has his meltdown moment after Harry dies. He is very much, although he makes himself one of the hostages, but as soon as is one of the hostages in that bus situation, he is in a way, well, he's one of them, and he's a victim as much as they are, in a sense. Yeah. So there is that sense of not being this maverick loner outsider that you would typically get in an 80s action film with Stallone, with Schwarzenegger and so on, or even in a film like Die Hard, which is a film that Speed gets compared to a lot, because there's similar situation in the sense that the hero has to kind of rescue a group of people who are entrapped in a space somewhere. But whereas John McClane, the Bruce Willis character, is very much kind of operating on his own, sort of in the air, vents from above. Keanu is right in the middle of it. And he relies on other people to help him. He relies on Harry. He relies on his colleagues, kind of in the chopper and the car to work with them. So there is a greater sense of him being part of a community, and I think there's also a greater kind of vulnerability, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like that relationship between him and Harry in that first act, it's equal. Like Keanu's not. They are absolutely a kind of an equal team in that.
Or possibly even subordinate. And then he says, you're the expert, I just work here. So he's the young trainee, isn't he? And relies on Harry a lot.
And his ideas, like, to get out of stuff are really, like, stupid and reckless. His big idea is jump and then make the train go faster. Yeah. And both times he's relying on Sandra Bullock's driving or just blind luck. Yeah. And you just think that is so not traditional. Like, he does not step in and with brute force or even a kind of problem-solving genius solve the day. He literally just kind of does his best to work it out in the moment, and it just works out, which I think is great, and I think that's why it's so refreshing as a movie in part. Anything else you wanted to share before we open it up to our audience?
Well, I think it's interesting in terms of looking at his previous roles. We were saying Speed was kind of his breakthrough film in terms of his career, and as we were saying earlier, the films he'd been in before were dramas. A lot of them were independent films, and if we look at his character, his personality as you know in this in Speed, and if we say it's very much a departure from a kind of dominant, tough, loner type masculinity, then that is something that fits with his previous roles, because he's been in a lot of kind of interestingly, there's a lot of consistency in terms of the characters he played before, all of which had a more, I guess, ambiguous or complex masculinity and sexuality, you could say. So there's, for example, one of his earlier films is Dangerous Liaisons, where he's basically the kind of hapless foil and lover of a much older woman, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's one of my absolute favorite films of all time. John Malkovich and Glenn Close being proper evil. Okay, so very, very good. My Own Private Idaho, he plays a prostitute or street hustler. Much Ado About Nothing is a Shakespeare adaptation, Kenneth Branagh Shakespeare adaptation, where there is a suggestion that his character kind of might be having an affair with his male kind of servant. And then finally, the sexuality is also kind of ambiguous in Dracula, in that his Jonathan Harker is even raped by Dracula's kind of vixens or kind of brides. So he's definitely not either the tough action hero or the tough kind of alpha male of the kind of Reaganite 80s action films.
Yeah, and like, you know, even in Point Break, like that is a really complicated relationship.
You get the bromance between him and Patrick Swayze all the way through in that as well. Yeah, exactly.
And what I love about Speed is that he brings all of that with him. You know, he's not doing that thing of like, I'm going to step, like, so Bruce Willis is an example who did comedy, and then when he goes into action, he kind of becomes a different actor.
Yes.
Whereas Keanu just stays Keanu, as we all know, but he brings all that stuff with him. So it's really interesting to watch him be, just essentially one of a team. And but he's also, which is one of the, you know, the reasons he is a star, he's incredibly magnetic, incredibly beautiful, but also just like Bill, you know, Bill and Ted, like just part of. And there's a strangeness to him, which I think is really fascinating. So I love this period where he just kind of, makes this huge movie, and it is just massive, but he still retains that weirdness and that strangeness and that ambiguity.
Exactly.
And he's awkward, you know. And a lot of people say that about his acting. Oh, he's not a very good actor, but I always read it as awkwardness, which I love. You know, I don't like, you know.
Yeah, it's a certain gentleness and kind of vulnerability, and kind of that he's more caring and attentive also in the relationship with the Sandra Bullock character. Like the first thing he does when she kind of, you know, starts crying over the woman's death, it's like he says, "What can I do? You know, how can I help you?" So so it's kind of
a beautiful
interesting
moment where, like, they just sort of shot from the back of the bus. I think it's after. Maybe after the woman dies or after he hears about Harry, and they're just holding hands.
They're holding hands,
and it's just such a sweet moment. Like, and it's just really wonderful. Cool, right? We'll open it out now and see what people have to say before we carry on. Has anybody got any thoughts they wanted to share about?
Sorry,
Speed?
we can't see you very well.
No one wants to dare. Oh yeah, there's one there.
No, I just wanted to sort of comment on two things. Firstly, just how well it builds tension in quite a literal way through the use of the speedometer, for lack of another word. Because with the literal ticking down of the speed, and you're made very aware of that fact, it is quite brilliant because it's such a simple concept. And a lot of films just create tension just through very complicated means, but then that's quite a beautifully simple and wonderful thing. And also, as you've already said, it takes a while to get on the bus. And throughout it, I was trying to find ways to nitpick it for being made in the 90s, but it wanted to be timeless. And I think if it were to be remade or whatever, that would be the one thing that would change, is that they probably rush into it. And it is just proof that you don't need to do that. Because it is, as you said, it is set up wonderfully, to the point where the ending is just weird and wonderful. but you just you don't care really. And yeah, no, it's just really well done.
Yeah, I think there's a real confidence in the storytelling. It's almost as if they know this is going to work. So the opening credits are, the lift it takes its time. The lift is not, it's not like speeding down. It's not kind of telling you, get ready. It's kind of, it takes its time just in terms of setting up, all of the aesthetics and all of the themes and everything that it wants to do in that sequence of the credits with the lift, and then that amazing long sequence. So then you are invested in these characters, and you are even in the Dennis Hopper character. You get so much into that, so that when they're on the bus, it can literally they take very little space between set pieces. I mean, it's like 30 seconds to a minute of let's catch our breath, and then it's into the next big thing, and all that work's kind of done up front, so that it can just propel, and it really propels through. And then it has that really kind of. I love the way the kind of romantic score sweeps in just as they escape the bus, because there's very little like of that kind of classical Hollywood music throughout. But then that moment, it's so euphoric, and it feels like the end. But then you say it's kind of not the end, and then we just want to know how it wraps up. And do they get together? Do they get the bad guy? And it is the 90s, so that stuff is resolved. But it does just build on those really simple blocks. I mean, it's one of those classic meetings, isn't it? Like there's a bomb on a bus.
Yeah, so it's a high concept film in this meaning that it's a film the premise of which you can summarize in one sentence. It's as simple as that, and it works. And that's almost like the film's title is its motto. It is about speed and it is about noise, and it constantly keeps moving. And in that sense, it's kind of kind of very sweetly in a way calls back to the first film ever made by the Lumiere brothers in 1896, Train Pulling Into a Station, which is just a train pulling into a station. And because people hadn't seen it before, they were like, the train's coming towards us. So there's this very simple joy of both of what film can do, which is capturing and creating movement, and that's what the film does kind of all the way through. And it's also what I thought watching it again was ironically it kind of follows the logic of the bomber, which is a bomb is meant to explode. So we have buses running into planes, we have trains shooting out of streets, we have planes exploding. So because it's the cinema of attractions, this term has been used for early cinema. So it's the cinema of spectacle. It's the joy of watching spectacular things happening on screen. So it would have been an anticlimax, wouldn't it, if the Jack Traven character would have managed to defuse the bomb? Yeah. Because the anticlimax. Yeah. So it had to happen, didn't it? So it had to explode.
I think that's exactly how it feels. They take the spectacle seriously.
Yes.
They really invest in the possibilities of the form to be spectacular, and like I say, to kind of get to that moment. And that kind of makes sense why Keanu at that time is going to be cast, because you don't want someone who's going to act. You don't want someone who's going to get in a way of and try and bring too much emotion to it. And he brings a lot of subtlety to it, but he doesn't get in the way of the action. He's basically, like say, rooted in it, and he carries it forward, rather than someone trying to do too much and too many asides and wanting to pull it into a more interior space. It's like, no, let's just keep, it's all archetypes on the bus.
Yes.
There's no characters on there. They all fulfill a role and a function. They have their three lines of, they're there to do a job. But the film takes them all seriously. So, and it's like, we need you here because we need to you need to do this at this point. You need to do this point. The construction of it is really impressive, I think. And what's impressive, is that it's 25 years old, but it doesn't feel that, because it's so dedicated to spectacle. It's so dedicated to being this experience, rooted around this very, very simple idea. It's not complex. The characters are not complex.
Yes.
That's why it works.
Yes. Yeah, so that's very much what it's about is, as we're saying, spectacle, movement, noise, and not kind of about the characters' inner lives or interiority or psychology. I've got a really nice quote from Richard Dyer, who's a film scholar who kind of reviewed the film, and he said about Speed that extreme sensation in this film is represented as experience not within the body, or the characters, but in the body's contact with the world, its rush, its expansiveness, its physical stress and challenge. So that's what it's about. It's characters or people being in touch with objects, moving objects, metal wheels, and so on and so forth. So that's what it's about. It's really not. We don't need to know anything about Keanu Reeves' character or Sandra Bullock's character. It's really all about the scenario that they're in, and it's moving very, very swiftly.
And those characters are not far removed from us as audience members.
Exactly.
They're not the Schwarzeneggers.
Yes.
There's no distance really.
Yeah.
There's a little distance, but it's not that far. So yeah, we can go through that experience with them and understand physically what they're going through in a way that you can't with Schwarzenegger. Like I can't, because the physicality of that body is so
extreme,
removed.
yeah. And at this point, Stallone and Schwarzenegger would have developed a star persona that is so self-conscious that they would have to reference it constantly in their films. I'll be back, and so on and so forth. Whereas, I guess Keanu is a bit of a clean slate at this point, which is why again it works so well. Yeah,
because around this time, Schwarzenegger's made The Last Action Hero, which is basically a comment on his own star persona.
Exactly.
And then this fresh thing kind of explodes onto the scene. Great. Right. Anyone else? Oh yeah. Do you want to move it along there for us, Luke? Just to whoever's.
What I've observed through the film, it was quite interesting seeing how you have the four actors who I recognised were mainly Keanu, Dennis, Sandra, and then Jeff Daniels. It was quite interesting to see how these four individuals actually had, because like some were pre-star days, and some of them everyone knew them. Dennis Hopper you knew, and it was quite interesting to see how back at the time they were very. They have such a character. They have such a character about things that Sandra's has her own characteristics. Jack's very vulnerable and very much having to think on his feet. And then you have Dennis Hopper, who's just psychotic but has a backstory to him that you can tell from him. And Jeff Daniels, who quite funny seeing him in a serious role, which he's always had for so many years. And yeah, I was quite fascinated just to see what it must have been at the time, just to see where people were at the time.
Well, I think what's interesting about, because I made a note of that about the actors as well, is that it's kind of Die Hard does that to a certain extent, where it puts people that in unfamiliar roles, particularly with Alan Rickman, in Die Hard. But what this does, which is kind of different to those 80s movies or B movies or action movies, is that it populates the entire cast with actors. Yeah. So you have Jeff Daniels, but then you also have Alan Ruck, Glenn Plummer. You have people who've been in movies and are TV, movie actors and not kind of B movie actors. And that's something that Die Hard does with, like Bonnie Bedelia and things like that. So, but this goes right down so that normally those roles will be a lot more. I mean, it's quite scenery chewing, but there's a lot more actors in it than normal, and it is that shift into taking action movies seriously as a vehicle for stars. So you get those kind of performances, and obviously the one I'm forgetting the most, Joe Morton, who I love Joe Morton. And pre this, Joe Morton's mostly he's in Terminator 2, but prior to that he's working with John Sayles and he's on stage, and all of a sudden he's in these big movies, and he brings something to it. He's able to really perfectly judge the material, so he's serious when he needs to be serious, but he's also, when we can't believe that Jack's kind of come out from underneath the bus, there's a real kind of like joy, and he's so like, I can't believe this, but it's just really good acting, and that's quite rare prior to this point, but it really becomes the norm. So now, you look at Marvel, and it kind of starts in where you like serious actors, theatre actors are in these big movies doing kind of things. But this is a movie where everyone knows exactly where to pitch it. Dennis Hopper must have been, there's maybe like 3 days work there for him. He's not really in it that much. He probably just made it all up, had a great time, but he knows exactly how to play that character. He's not trying to make it King Lear. He's not trying to he'll deliver the lines and a little bit about backstory, but he's not that fussed. He's really there. He knows his role. And it is interesting to see Jeff Daniels. This is like a year before Dumb and Dumber, when he becomes this kind of comic. But he, again, at that time, he's a serious actor. He's in a lot of indie movies sort of prior to this, and again, really taking this role as seriously as he can, but knowing ultimately he has some pretty cheesy lines, and Yeah, I do find it interesting to look back at those actors now, and most of those are in TV now. You know, like, whereas, or they're in Marvel movies still. Yeah.
True.
So, cool. Good point. Well done.
Just want to say that going into this movie, I had no idea what it was. I looked at the poster outside on my phone, and I thought, it's going to be rubbish. Action movie, I'd be so bored for all of it. But it's the most fun I've had in a film in quite a long time. Seeing it. I didn't empathise with the characters, and I was just kind of going through it. But with this, it balances being going back to a spectacle and seeing all these crazy things and not knowing what's happening next, and also going to kind of some really emotional moments, like when they hear that Harry died, and it focuses on Sandra Bullock's character who's crying. When the old lady gets blown up and she goes away, and it focuses on Sandra Bullock's character crying, and kind of lingers. It cuts the high action theme, and it kind of shows all the fear, and it really allows empathy to kind of seep through the film. And so much so that I tried to grab the gun as I was sliding off the train. It was. Then I realised it was a film. I think it was really balanced that well, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Great, yeah, and I'm glad you got caught up in it. And another reason for showing it as well is that this is a film that if you have seen it or you do see it, your generation would probably watch this on a laptop now. And I do think it's a different experience. I mean, I haven't seen this on a big screen for 25 years, and it's such a different experience. It really does. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm tense. I'm, how's it going to be resolved? I know it's going to be resolved, but it is in that the way that it's a beautifully edited film. It knows how long to hold those moments. It knows how long to run a sequence. It's really, I think it's more not luck but in the sense of you look at Jan de Bont's career. This is
what else has he done?
That was Rennie Harling. I always get him and Rennie Harling confused. Jan de Bont did Twister, which I also liked. Again, a very kind of like simple idea. It's just people running towards and away from tornadoes. It came out 2 years after this. It's good. Better than that sounds. But he didn't really, and he was like a DOP or something before, and then he didn't have. This feels like one of those films where it comes together, And the premise is a bit rubbish, and it is a 90s kind of poster Keanu kind of, just like big. It almost feels like it could be a spoof. It is such a high concept, and a lot of films I think have tried to do what it does. Speed 2, Cruise Control, for example. Poor Sandra Bullock back for that. Don't know what she did to deserve that. But it's one of those things, like we say, it takes its construction and its aesthetics so seriously. It looks simple. And I think a lot of filmmakers afterwards, a lot of films and certainly studios thought, we'll just replicate that. And they don't take it seriously enough. So it doesn't quite work. This is just so tight in every way.
It's the confidence in the premise as well, isn't it? Like if you are feeling, this is looking at the script, think that this is silly, and you put some kind of self-conscious quips in there, then it would probably lose the tension that it has, doesn't it? So and that's why I think it made me realize again that the 90s are one of my favorite decades for films because it's big and boisterous and so wonderfully unself-conscious in the way that. So that's it's really, really nice about it.
One of the notes that I was kind of thinking, what am I going to see, having not rewatched it in quite a few years? What are the politics going to be of the film? And the note was none. There is no politics in the film, really. Like there's lines, but it's not a political film. It's not got an agenda. It's not saying anything.
It's even in the dialogue, isn't it? When the Sandra Bullock character says, "What did we do to deserve this? Did we blow up the guy's country?" And Keanu says, "No, he just wants money." Yeah. So we don't, as an audience, we're not even made to worry about any political implications. All we need to know, he's a bad guy, he's a psycho, he's good with bombs, and that's kind of all we need to know. I mean, the politics are, I guess, the politics that are in it are more kind of subtle than that, in the sense that it's a very clear, I guess, class distinction. White middle class people drive cars, and black people, Latinos, and Asian people take the bus to work. That's all.
Apart from Tune Man.
Exactly.
Tune, with his new Jag.
With his Jaguar, yes.
But it has to be destroyed.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. No, I think it's it's interesting thinking about how when you describe Dennis Hopper's character, that you're almost describing the way Heath Ledger's character in the Joker, in the Dark Knight, is you know, he's interested in chaos and like just blowing the world up, and he hasn't got this like main, and it's like, well, but they so much is put on top of that around the film, whereas here that is literally it.
That is literally
he wants his money.
Yeah.
He has no care about what he'll do to get it, and that's as far as it goes. Which is interesting. Kind of the 90s is post Unabomber, it's post manifesto. He doesn't have a manifesto.
Nope.
He is a white terrorist, but he doesn't have a cause other than give me my money. The other thing I want to note as well is like Sandra Bullock is brilliant. You know, she's really, really brilliant. She's really funny, and she has the best withering look when Ortiz tells her like how to drive.
Yes.
Like she's just like, yeah, thanks for that. Like, you know, I'm doing all right. Like classic bit of mansplaining right in the middle of this film. Like actually, Sandra just, you know, she's like, dude, leave me alone.
And even Keanu is complimenting her on her driving. So
yeah, because he knows like that's some serious driving.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Oh, yep. We go one at the back and then send it all. Oh, there's 3. Yeah, cool. Just send it round to. We'll get to everyone. We're warmed up now.
What I really enjoyed, I think, about this was it was really refreshing to kind of see these character tropes that are often that you see like quite often in the action genre, but they're a bit different here in the sense, you know, usually, you know, you have the lone wolf hero that you were talking about, and Keanu's character Jack, at the start of the film, he definitely sort of came off as that, and maybe like a bit of a loose cannon sort of thing. But when it really got down to it, you saw that how much he relied on everyone around him, and that really like plays off well like with the other kind of characters that you see. Like you have this, you know, the senior but more responsible partner. Then you have their like firm but well-meaning captain, and even Sandra Bullock, who's kind of like the unwilling woman dragged along with for the ride. And these are all like tropes that you see really often, but the way that the writing and the acting kind of goes together makes these characters feel like quite in depth, even though they're actually not when you really like look at it objectively, just because they're played so well, and they kind of like they subvert the tropes at some point. It's like you had his partner who obviously expressed skepticism towards him like the start of the film and his methods, but like he was quite quick to turn around and trust him, because in the end that was it. He trusted him, and that really like kind of like plays and builds into the whole theme of community that the film kind of has going, because everyone kind of has that vulnerability that makes them feel like a real person and not like a character trope that we kind of see but don't actually connect to.
Yeah, good observation.
It's really interesting when we're talking about, you know, the film invokes the sense of community, because that it's obviously the complete antithesis of the arch American ethic of individualism, isn't it? And to have a Hollywood film set in a public a means of public transport is is also in a way deeply ironic, because it is all about cars, isn't it? And it's all about, you know, the only way or the only time you will take a bus is when you have no money, or for some reason you can't drive a car. But it works because you're immediately invested in the story, because, as you're saying, the characters are set up so well and so well acted.
Yeah. Just, you know, if we're going to add a layer on there, you know, the Los Angeles location kind of plays into that. You know, it's the end of the road for the kind of manifest destiny. You know, that the individual will go out and seek their fortune and their glory, and they arrive on the West Coast for that. But here, everyone's been there, but they all rely on each other. There's a lovely moment where Cameron from Ferris Bueller gets saved, and Ortiz gives him a big hug on the, you know, like it's just tiny little moments where you're just like, you know, it really is. Yeah, it's very anti-American in those kind of ways of, you know, like Keanu calls him Gigantor at one point. Which was just
where did
like,
that come from?
I'm trying to think. There must be some kind of 80s or 90s cartoon reference or something, or it's just racist. I don't know. Do you want to go to the back and then we'll come back down?
It was kind of nice just to watch a film that embraced its own simplicity and didn't get bogged down in trying to be more than it actually is. I think at its core it's quite comedic,
Yeah.
But in a way, I know it sounds a bit far-fetched, but it kind of reminded me of Robocop in the sense that it knew when to take itself seriously enough, but also when to have fun with its premise. And so as a result, it's a fun movie, and it knows exactly what it is, but you can take it seriously enough in the action scenes, which is important. And I think what makes it even better is, in an age where, you know, CGI wasn't as prevalent, it was nice to just embrace its visceral intensity, and just seeing the action on screen and never feeling like it looked fake. It was always real. And, you know, the cinematography, I think, played a really important part in that.
Yeah, good shouts there.
I absolutely agree that the physicality of it, the fact that the explosions are actually explosions, that the cut to Keanu and Sandra as, you know, the bus explodes into the plane is them really being hit by, you know, the wave of an explosion. You know, that's not CGI, that's a real explosion there. And I absolutely agree that, you know, the sense of realness and kind of tangibility is a very important part to the film, working as well as it does, absolutely.
Yeah, it really builds the peril, and yeah, I think it is funny, you know, and I think again, it's casting those actors who know how to deliver it. You know, Keanu has two great lines, isn't he? One at the start where he says, "What's going to stop it?" He's like, "The basement." And then later on when he says, you know, like, "We got lucky," he's like, "Why?" It's like the bomb didn't go off. You know, there are really funny moments with it, and again, it's good performers knowing, and a good script knowing when you need a bit of levity, when you need a little bit of empathy. And as well, I mean, Sandra Bullock's a really funny performer. You know, I mean, Keanu and her both kind of almost made their name in comedies, you know. So that move from being comedic and having great timing and coming into that role really does make it possible to have those moments in a way that a straight actor might just go for the, you know, the straight, you know, the pensive. And there's none of that. There's lots of tone in really small moments, which really kind of moves it along. Is that it's the ghost of Dennis Hopper? We're not talking about him enough. You're great, Dennis. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think it was quite interesting how they set it up. It was quite a juxtaposition between like the obvious concept of having to stay above 50 and the speed that everything was physically moving at in the film, and between the actual storyline itself. The storyline was quite slow. It took its time, gave you time to sort of stop guessing, okay, what's the next thing going to go wrong, what's going to happen, give you time to sort of try and guess. And I just thought the juxtaposition between the actual speed and the pace of the film was quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting as well. And also, yeah, like you're saying, they're all trapped. They're all moving at speed at the same time, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Whereas they don't really go anywhere. You know, they are kind of contained. And like you say, all those dramatic moments and those kind of relationships can play out. I think that juxtaposition you're talking about is why you believe the relationship. Yes. You know, because you get the time in it. You know, they're not dying from country to country. They're not dying from space to space. The buses. Mm-hmm. They're all just on the bus. Yeah. That's really
So exactly. So there's an interesting kind of difference, I guess, between this film and then say the Bourne films, where it's basically in this you have objects moving, you have the lift moving, the bus moving, the train moving, but the action hero is, as you're saying, relatively stationary and relatively passive, whereas Jason Bourne is all about Bourne being in constant movement and that being accompanied by very fast cuts and very kind of visceral camera work. So it's kind of a shift in there, isn't it?
Yeah, because essentially like three scenes, isn't it? It's like like you say, lift, bus, train. That's it. You know, and then all this.
Like the danger and the element is always external. It's outside of this, like, well, I wouldn't say safe, but like internal space is where they're at, and this is where they're hurtling towards something else rather than something coming at them. I think it's quite different. In action, usually you've got danger coming towards you, dodge this, jump that. Whereas you're in this moving bus or train or lift, and the problem's outside, and you've got to figure out a way how you're going to stop this. It's outside. How do you get outside?
Yeah. How do you stop moving towards it rather than it moving towards you?
It's like reacting, isn't it? Yeah.
I think it's very different for action films. I quite enjoyed it.
Cool. Great. Yes, we're converting to the speed cult. Yeah, do you want to send it down? We've got a couple more down here.
Just a little thing, but I loved the advert on the back of the bus, which, if you didn't catch it, was money isn't everything, and then underneath in brackets, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool.
There's lots of those, isn't there? There's lots of really lovely visual. The one at the end where it kind of bursts out and it says like, this is a safe site, 2 and 3 days since the last accident. And
Exactly.
then this tube train comes through. And what's playing at the cinema? 2001, A Space Odyssey. Like, so random that it's just like, why is 2001 playing at Man's Chinese Theatre on this random 994 day? It's just great. And what I love about it as well, that's kind of Yandabont all over. It's like, I love 2001. It's like there's no relationship between these two movies at all. There's no, like, it's just like, I like that movie, I'm going to put it on. Yeah, and it's so incongruous, but it's just like, there's lots of little things like that on rewatches where you start to notice how, like the holding of the hands, and there's a few moments as well, and like Harry's moment, Jeff Daniels acting when
he realizes the bomb's going to go off, he's going to die.
Yeah, there's so many small moments where it just elevates it above the standard fare. Cool, yeah. Another anti-American there.
It was interesting how you said that the only motivation was money, is for like the destruction. Is I got the impression that it was more about challenging the sort of establishment, and it was a game of he felt so sort of betrayed of like giving up his life, and it was more of a sort of game to say like, I've done this for my entire life, like I'm challenging you to sort of prove that you're better than me, like I don't know, I can't sort of word it right, but I think for me, my interpretation was there was a bit of motivation of sort of just like a challenge as well as money, I think.
Yeah, I think you can read onto it. But you have to do that work. I think that, I'm not necessarily sure that it's there explicitly. We don't see him ranting and raving about the injustice. There's a little bit at the end, but it's very small.
There's the bit about the watch, sort of saying, I do all of this and all you get is a watch.
Yeah, I think the game between him and Jack is a real thing, and he's enjoying that, but the watch is what, is a line that Harry says,
Yes,
another 30
and to give Harry a clue that he is actually the the person behind it.
I think the game is there, but I think it's inviting you to do it so that it doesn't bog down the plot. Like, we don't see him build any of the bombs. There's none of that fetishization of anything. It's just like, he's already done all that, but we don't know what that process was like. And he can't. Yeah, he does enjoy the game, but he also enjoys watching sports while it's happening. He's very American, isn't he? Like, he's drinking his Coke and watching American football. Yeah. He's just so weird. Yeah, and Yandabont's Dutch as well, I think, as well. So I think a lot of that stuff is an outsider's idea of America, or which I think is probably adds little flavours to it. But I think the reading into the backstory and the reading into the motivation is you can do it, but the film isn't affected by it. And I think a lot of the time when you're trying to read in all that stuff, the film kind of collapses under the weight. But like we were saying, because it's so simple, it can be both. If you want to read in, that's that I think that's probably there. But the film is kind of also just saying it is this to this point to this point to this point. Yeah.
I also just quickly wanted to say there was like fantastic respite just as the police are closing in on the house, because up to then you've had so much noise and like visual cinematic experience, and then the sound design just goes silent and you just hear the footsteps, and I just thought it was it's sort of like letting the audience just have a little breath and like before it goes into like the next act.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing, that only in that moment when it cuts to Harry and the SWAT team kind of going to enter the house do you realise how much constant speed, movement and noise you have been hearing for the last 45 minutes, and you suddenly go, did the film stop? Why is it suddenly quiet? So so it's it works very well to kind of throw that into relief, doesn't it? Yeah, absolutely agree. Yes.
Yeah. Cool. There was a couple down here as well, I think people had. Yeah, it's coming down. Can we send it down this way? Thank you. Yeah, that's a bit in that silence. You kind of know, don't you? You kind of know this is not right because it's not noisy.
Exactly.
It's not, something's amiss.
I just looking at the context
context of actually sitting here as the audience was really interesting to me, because I feel like if a film like this, and it was made in this day and age, we've been raised hearing words like terrorism and bombs like on the news like very often, and it's a very serious subject because it happens a lot in the world at this moment, and it's a global issue. But I feel like the film was timeless in so many ways, including that we were really transported back to a time where you could instantly, like, the villain is like a traditional villain, like he isn't, you know, that's not a realistic human being, it's just, oh, the madman, and, you know, he's missing a finger, it's almost takes you back to, like, the childish wonder of the cinema, when no one can actually be that evil, and they don't make it, they make it a very theatrical bad guy, which is, I think, a really good element of the cinema, is actually taking you back to a time where, like, it's nice to believe that actually stuff like this can't happen, and it also, I feel like if a film in this day and age was made about that, there would be so many political elements, and there would be, you know, the guy on the bus that was the tourist guy, he would probably be racist and be like, oh, I wonder what religion the terrorist is, and it would be something like that. But it was nice to be transported back to an audience back in that time, which they didn't have any of those thoughts, and the film really carries that, and it's really timeless because of that as well, and that's how you are able to have laughs through it as well, because it's not serious, because it's like, no, it's just a random evil guy with like a missing finger. It's not like a serious film. Although there's tension, there's not political issues like you said earlier. It's, you know, it's funny in places, and a lot of the like really theatrical shots remind me of like the first shot in the first Jurassic Park film where it zooms in on the guy's mouth when he's being eaten by a dinosaur. Like it's not serious. It carries that. You're able to laugh at moments, which I think is lost in this day and age in cinema.
Yes, very, very interesting observation. Yeah, I think I understand what you mean, in the sense that it's that thing of it's fantastical to an extent, isn't it? He's a super villain in the sense that he is, you know, he's not, like you say, a real human being, but he's, you know, he's so evil that you think, okay, so this is I'm in a safe space. I'm watching a fantastical story unfold, which can be, you know, one of the joys of cinema, but I think the trick is to manage to kind of, I guess, touch on real issues and current issues, and still draw on or build on that magic of the cinema, I guess. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, no, I think it's tricky, I think, because it's clearly a pre 9/11 movie.
Exactly.
You know, like, and what I think I know what you're saying, in the sense that you can't really do that now.
No.
You know, whether Hollywood hasn't really done that since 9/11. What's interesting about it is that it feels kind of cartoonish and classic supervillain because he's white. You know, and I think as well about, you know, you were sort of saying about the politics, but the same year is True Lies, which has really racist depictions of, you know, Middle Eastern terrorists. And you go back to something like Back to the Future and its portrayal of, you know, which is beloved and is an awesome movie, but its portrayal of the, is it the Lebanese? The Libyans. You know, its portrayal of the Libyans is really problematic. You know, the pre 9/11, like, depictions of terrorists were, you know, were very kind of general and racist stuff. But they were kind of, but the characters were built in the same way that this character's built. You know, it's kind of thirsty for power or money, and, like, you know, but obviously the context is different here, and that has been lost, but, you know, but in the sense of particularly how it portrays white American villains, you know. I don't think it's been lost necessarily in terms of how it portrays Middle Eastern and Arab villains. You know, a lot of post 9/11 cinema is even more, or it's more directly, it knows it's being kind of very detrimental and very, you know, critical of kind of, you know, Middle Eastern and Arab communities. But what's changed, I think, is its portrayal of kind of, well, white supervillains and their motives and their engagement in the world post 9/11, and knowing that every terrorist kind of representation is going to have a context.
Exactly.
So yeah, it is interesting to watch it, knowing that a lot of things it's doing, it doesn't know what's coming. You know, it's interesting to watch films that are doing something that is very common, that has such a mark like 9/11, where everything changed in the way those things were represented, and this film has no idea it's coming. So It's just like you say, it's a supervillain with no motive, no ideology. He wants money. He's happy to, you know, put hundreds of American lives in danger. But because he's American, it feels kind of different. It's almost like he's not American. Mm-hmm. He's not white. He is, like you say, a supervillain. Mm-hmm. Whereas representations of the same year and around that time that were not white were very, very politically loaded. But they weren't necessarily picked up at the time. And it's definitely taken a kind of post 9/11 reflection to actually acknowledge and analyse what those reputations were saying. And I think it's important to note now that doesn't mean that you can't watch Back to the Future and think it's awesome, but acknowledging that what was being done at the time, probably could have been handled more sensitively, or was rooted in the context of how everything was done at the time, I think is kind of key, and because you can trace that lineage through to to the sort of post 9/11 cinema, and it's interesting how few white kind of terrorists there are, apart from in Bond movies. But how, if they do turn up, how they justify what they do, and how political it is, and how rooted in particularly kind of capitalist kind of ideologies it is, and the way the world has worked, and how they are essentially responding to the world's, almost kind of tectonic movement on its own, and I'm just benefiting from society and human nature. It's really interesting to see that change. It is both aesthetically and kind of ideologically a pure movie, just before things change. Well, 5 years before kind of things really change. Yeah,
and I think also in kind of action and crime films now, there's a lot more of a tendency to kind of flesh out the villain a lot more, kind of make his interior psychology a lot more complex. The Joker is the best example of that, or the Javier Bardem character in Skyfall, for example. It's the villain becomes as much of an important character as the hero in terms of his background, his motivations, what is going on in his head. Whereas that's not the case in this film at all. I mean, Dennis Hopper's got a much smaller part, and his part is very clearly defined. He's evil. He's got bombs. He wants money, and that's it. Yeah.
Literally, like, he's not the alter ego of Keanu Reeves' character. No. They're cops, and that's a plot device to have the gold watch and track it. Yeah. Oh yeah, do you want to send it along?
Do you think the scale of the kind of the danger? There's only about 20 people in the bus at a time. And there's only about 100 people affected, or could be affected at any one point. Do you think that would work as well post 9/11? Do you think the scale would be as worrying to the audience if it wasn't a film from 1994?
I think that Hollywood has thought that and has decided to populate its films with hundreds of people at risk, and only a couple of people can save them. There must be hundreds and thousands of people that die and are at risk, But I don't agree that you wouldn't be able to get the same thing now. I think that it feels like there was a lot of cultural decisions made about particularly action and blockbuster movies, about what a hero should do, what an American hero should do, and who's at risk and how they're at risk, But I think that the scale of the human drama is absolutely right, and it allows the scale of the physical spectacle to play out, and just feel really, really kind of resonant, because you see, I mean, there's more people on the bus than you actually get to spend time with, but you know more than two people. It's, there's like 5 or 6 people and that you're invested in, just from the repetition of seeing them over and over again and having one line here or there, in a way that when I watch modern blockbuster films, I don't always get the same, because who's at stake, and that kind of starts really with Titanic, I think, in a way that there's so many people, and the people that you're actually spending time with are not interesting, and there's this great swathe of people who could be interesting and you're supposed to empathise with, but you never get to that you're not connected to them. It feels like a disconnect. I know that's pre 9/11, but it feels like that now we live in an age where there's a lot of, that they think that if you have a lot of people at risk, that will automatically ramp up the drama, and it's like.
But it could almost lead to you disconnecting from it. So that, like, one example that I'm thinking about is the third Nolan Batman film with the two ships being, at ferries being in danger of being blown up. That is, it's almost the people in danger become this abstract concept, and it is all about the hero and the villain. It's not really about the people they save. Whereas with this film, it's because you're in the space with them on the bus, there is much more of a sense of an immediate danger. And I think, to answer your question, I think if a film was written well and directed well, it shouldn't really matter, how many people's lives are on stake. If it lets you connect with them and invest in them, then actually they're more real than if you have, hundreds and hundreds of people who remain ciphers or remain very abstract.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples in recent years. I can't at the minute, but I'm sure there's probably a few examples where that trend is bucked, where it is an isolated case, and it's a few people. And it just feels more immediate, and that And it's interesting to see sort of Marvel films reflect on the criticisms of it and try to deal with that stuff. All these people die in buildings, or like Man of Steel, like how they try and then, but they don't ever reckon with it by getting smaller.
Yes, well, exactly. And then
So
in the last one, you basically get the future of the whole world is at stake, or the whole world is being blown up, or you get the apocalypse affected by Thanos. So
this feels like the whole world's at stake in this movie, because it's a few lives at stake.
Exactly.
It really is. You zero in on understanding that what really is at stake on an individual basis. There's probably much more coherent and smarter writing on that but anyone else before we wrap up? We've got probably time for one more if anyone wants to. No, we're all talked out. Cool. Well, thank you for your contributions. That was really great observations and insights. I'm really pleased you just enjoyed it as a group. It was nice to sit with an audience and laugh and feel the tension. Thank you very much, Verena, for joining me and offering such great insight as well.
Thank you.
We will see you again. Thanks to the Poly for hosting us, and we'll see you again on the Cinematologists.
All right, pop quiz. Airport. Gunman with one hostage. He's using her for cover. He's almost to a plane. You're 100 feet away.
What do you think? Shoot the hostage.
What?
Go for the good wound and he can't get to the plane with her. Clear shot.
You're deeply nuts, you know that?
All right, gentlemen, what we have here are 13 passengers in an express elevator. Bomb's already taken out cables. Bomber wants $3 million or he blows the emergency brakes.
Anything else that'll keep this elevator from falling?
The basement.
He can strike anywhere, at any time.
Will the mystery guest please sign in?
Why are they messing with me? Do they think I'm doing this for fun?
For LA cop Jack Traven.
Tell me again, Harry, why did I take this job?
Come on, 30 more years of this, you get a tiny pension and a cheap gold watch.
Cool.
The game began.
Very exciting, Jack. Some close calls, huh?
When someone put the city of Los Angeles to the ultimate test.
Pop quiz, hotshot. There's a bomb on a bus. Once the bus goes 50 miles an hour, the bomb is armed. If it drops below 50, it blows up. What do you do? What do you do?
Now.
Are you insured? Yeah, why?
He's the only solution.
We just got a ransom demand from your terrorist. Says he's rigged the city bus. Where's Jack?
Where do you think?
Stay on or get off.
Get off.
This is much better.
Everybody hold on!
Dennis Hopper, Sandra Bullock.
Pop quiz. You have a hair trigger aimed at your head. What do you do? What do you do?
Speed. Get ready for rush hour.
Thanks very much to the Poly at Falmouth for hosting us again. Thanks to Verena for co-chairing and being a kind of great sparring partner for that. And thanks to our Freshers audience for a really committed and interesting kind of conversation. It was daunting, I think, on the first week of term. Well, this was before the first week of term, to be charged with kind of saying stuff in any forum. So thanks very much to everyone for contributing. So Dario, what did you make of kind of revisiting Speed and this idea of where it sits in the kind of the action landscape?
Yeah, I really enjoyed rewatching it. I mean, to be honest with you, it's a film I've seen a lot. I've seen many times. I think it does do that thing of pure action, where I totally agree with what you were saying, where it is outside of ideology in many ways. I mean, again, that's a problematic thing to say because you can read it ideologically in various ways, I think. But I think it doesn't have an internal ideological agenda. Yes, you could say that the Dennis Hopper character maybe has got some, working class grievances that come out. But it's interesting how they're nuanced around cop versus cop. It's like not outsider versus cop. So that almost solves the ideology, doesn't it? Because if Keanu thinks he's in the wrong, then he's in the wrong. Yeah. So it's I think it solves that quite quickly. I can't get over the bridge jump scene. You know what I mean? That is as close to jumping the shark. And looking back now, it's kind of like, would it have earned it back in the day? And does it earn it now? I don't know. But, the ridiculousness of it is kind of like, makes me laugh now. And sort of I enjoy that stupidness of it. Because I think it's one of those, and you touched on it in the talk, it takes itself seriously. Just to the right amount, I think. There's certain moments of comedy in it, and I think there are great lines which I'll come back to. But that sense of it is not tongue in cheek in the way that say the transition from Mission Impossible 1 and 2 to the later Mission Impossibles turn into something else. As soon as Simon Pegg arrives in Mission Impossible, you can't take anything seriously anymore. Even though it's great, the later ones, but it's kind of like, the first one is quite serious, and I think that maybe it is of a time pre 9/11, as you were saying, where it still coats the spectacle and the ridiculousness of the spectacle in an air of seriousness and real world reality. That the bridge jump just about doesn't kind of happen, and I think that the CGI or the lack of CGI is a key aspect of this, and maybe again one of the reasons why I find it a lot more difficult to get on board with today's action movies than I did back there, because you do feel a visceral reaction. And then we were laughing when they get to the airport and they get out of they get on the truck, the little metal plate to skirt underneath and escape with Sandra Bullock, and then the bus does have to crash into an aeroplane. It's like, how much budget have we got left? Let's blow up an aeroplane. You know what I mean? It's just like, yes, this is sort of 80s, 90s action budgeting going on here. It's really good. And then you sort of realise that the last third is almost kind of like sort of superfluous, and I do think that it does kind of fall apart narratively, because like, what would Sandra Bullock be doing there, wandering around the streets near where that's going? I mean, it's totally ridiculous. But they've got to kind of finish it off somewhere. I'm just wondering whether they've got to catch the bad guy, haven't they? They've got to sort of figure that out, and moving on to another scenario is the way to do that. And you've almost got, like, because you said that you have the two bookends, I think it works narratively in that sense, even though the plot and its realist context just completely goes out. Any sense of that goes out the window. But like you say, I think you do say in the talk, it kind of does earn it, because it just keeps you on the edge all the time.
Yeah, it's committed to the spectacle. It's committed to this chemistry between Bullock and Reeves, which is, almost a kind of lustful one rather than a romantic one. Like there's no sense at the end that they're going to be together forever, but this is definitely a bonding moment that they're going to want to realise, which I think is great. It does take itself seriously in its mission to be spectacular. Like I think that's really really astute in terms of like it's. And this idea of the narrative working but the plot not working, I think is spot on. You know, like it's how do we kind of get, and that the bridge jump feels like okay, we need this moment in the middle, and audiences will either go with it or they won't. But you get good performers, and everybody on the bus is up to the job. You know, and Joe Morton is obviously,
Joe Morton's just,
you know,
quality,
just absolute quality, prestige in that moment. You know, just kind of literally drags you along with it, which I think is is exciting. It's interesting that you say about the peg thing there, because I do think that's a kind of signifier of where a lot of movies are now, which is this kind of commentary on itself, or an ironic distance, or a detachment, or a sense of having to underplay some of the ridiculousness because of shifts in kind of global and viewing context at the same time, which is kind of makes me, which is why, you know, someone like Jason Statham is an interesting action star, I think, now, because he's clearly someone who looks like, and a lot of the time performs like, someone from that 80s 90s trio of, you know, the Planet Hollywood trio, but he is funny and aware enough to know that it has to be ironic now. You know, there has to be a level of distance and a kind of knowing glance about it, because that's the idea is no one buys it now. No one will buy the ridiculousness of Speed as a $100 million movie, and reward it in the same way, which I think is just the way that the culture's shifted.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you were talking about in terms of Dennis Hopper as well, and his sort of position as the kind of white working class terrorist, and the comparison with other films of the time, and sort of later films as well, that definitely depict a stereotype of evil around a race or an ethnicity or a particular identity that we would probably consider problematic now. And I think what's interesting is we're in the era now where I think that you know, there could be people who are identifying with the Dennis Hopper character. See, he is an identity now that has been, you know, belittled or subjugated, and you know, he's got a grievance these days. Do you know what I mean? It's really interesting how sort of watching it from 2019, it's like, what's his? I think his deal is much more readily available to be projected onto that character than it would have been pre 9/11, and especially sort of pre-Trump, let's say.
But and I also think that's the 2019 thing, isn't it? Which is, what's the ideology? You know, where do I fit into this thing? And I think that's what we were trying to sort of talk a little bit about in the Q&A, is like, I don't think, and you mentioned, I think you said it really well, and you say about the loop, the police loop, which kind of closes off the film doesn't contain an ideology. You know, but that's not to say you can't project onto it. I mean, you can project onto anything, but I do think, it's interesting in 2019 to look at what Hopper's character might represent in a wider cultural context. And it's kind of like, this is, it's almost a moment for, like you say, kind of the working class, blue collar American who feels aggrieved at the system and is going to, you know, fight back. And that's what Joker says as well, so that was kind of in the water as well when we were thinking about it.
And I think also it takes a certain kind of, I don't want to say star, but on-screen presence to sell this movie. And I think, you know, you talked a lot about Keanu, but I think it is clear that Dennis Hopper does sell that character really, really well, because he is sort of maniacally enjoying it. And even like at the very beginning is that sense of he's just does the elevator bombing, and yet the next day he's set up the speed bombing as well, the bus bombing as well. And it's kind of like, hang on a minute, he's supposed to have spent 2 years on this bus thing. Why has he got the elevator bombing sorted out? He must be like multitasking like mad. And it's just like, if you sit back and think about it, it's that thing, the plot doesn't work, but the narrative does. And then he's got great, I mean, he just delivers some great one-liners, you know, like the pop quiz hotshot stuff, and do not attempt to grow a brain, and my personal favourite, we've got all the balls in the world right here, you know what I mean? Which, you know, if I could work into a sentence, I would, but it's very difficult. But
hard to do in timetabling meetings.
No, it is really, especially in lectures. That would be it. It would be just complaints galore, I think. But
what's interesting about Dennis Hopper is that, you know, this is a period where he's literally just doing it for the money. You know, there's that famous quote where his kid asks him why did he do Super Mario Brothers, and he said, well, you see those expensive trainers on your feet, you know, that's why I don't think he's even interested in this as a kind of movie. So he's literally being that kind of Dennis Hopper villain for, you know, wheeling it out, which works perfectly in this context. But I don't think he's invested any kind of interior life or backstory into this character. He's literally turning up on set, chewing the scenery, making, you know, wise cracks and mostly ad-libbing, I think, stuff when he has to sit in front of all these screens, and doing his thing. And his motivation is money to make the film, and his motivation in the film is money. So it kind of works. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. You know, he's perfectly cast in that sense.
Yeah, and I think another thing, just sort of thinking about the direction and the fact that this is the first feature is just incredible to me. You know, I think it was Jan de Bont's first film, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Which is just insane, really. And I wonder how much...
Because he'd been a DP before.
Yeah. I'm wondering how much there was a very clear script here, and he thought, this is just going to work, and therefore I'm not going to kind of mess around with it too much. I'm just speculating here. But also I think that, like, talking about the lineage then and moving on maybe to today's action films, but like I think that there's sort of this does trigger a series of sort of situational action films. So it's something like, you mentioned Die Hard, and then Air Force One, and Cliffhanger, and these sort of movies that are around a kind of situation where there isn't much going to change. I mean, I get it. There's 3 situations here, but they're all ostensibly the same. It's people trapped in a situation. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think you say it in the talk. Are there any other films of the last 10 or 20 years where it's action for action's sake, where you just don't think, oh, this is actually superficial because of it, and I'm not, you know, you can only enjoy it to a certain level, like a really throwaway level? Or are there examples where it's like, I am totally in this? I mean, the biggest one, I mean, the most obvious one that I would say has worked in that way is Mad Max Fury Road, where I don't think, because we know the context of that world, you don't need to be explained. It doesn't need to explain this is a apocalyptic dystopia and all that kind of stuff. And it's very simplistically on this road chase and then the chase back. You know what I mean? It's very similar in that sense to Speed, I think. So I don't know if since the screening whether you'd thought of any other films that work kind of in this way of pure action and yet they're good enough to sustain that without you thinking this is just kind of nonsense things blowing up all the time.
Yeah, I think it's. I'm a big fan of John Wick, which I think does that similar thing of sets up in the first 5 minutes or the first 10 minutes. This is where it's going. Widower living on his own, isolated. Invaders in his house. They kill his dog. He's going out for revenge. You know, and you know it's something. You know, it's the dog is symbolic. That's all you need to know. So what happens after that is waiting to find out exactly what the connection is, but ultimately it's as simple as that, and I think that works very well. The other one, which I think is a film I think is really underrated and feels like a throwback to those kind of films you're talking about, is Dredd, which came out about the same time as The Raid, and they're essentially the same film. And I saw Dredd first, so I prefer it because it is literally essentially the same film, and there's a kind of urban legend about the screenplay and how it was moved around and things like that, but Judge Dredd, a character you kind of recognise and you know he is the law. He turns up at a high rise, and the kingpin is at the top of this high rise building, and the kingpin runs the building. So it's someone who goes in and he has to get to the top of the building, and it's, you know, it's propulsive in the same way that those films you're talking about are, in the same way that Mad Max Fury. It's the propulsion. It's like we know where we're going, and then you're interested in how you get there. You know, it's like the bomb on the bus. How are they going to solve this thing, which we are moving forward towards at all times? And Dredd's a great example of literally going up a floor at a time to get to this payoff. And it's done with wit and it's done with style. And what's interesting about, The Raid and John Wick is similar to that Jan de Bont thing. These are films made by stunt coordinators who've kind of moved in. So they're, you know, without being dismissive, you know, they have a real pedigree in delivering a particular thing, which is stunt set pieces, or in the case of Jan de Bont, you know, action cinematography. And that's so the fact that for their early films, that's what they really zero in on is thrilling, because they're not necessarily hampered by all the other stuff which storytelling directors might kind of want to put in the way of it, you know, and that feels kind of lost, which is action directors who are really interested in action as a form of, as the storytelling, you know, not as a kind of something that sits alongside a backstory or anything else. It's like this is the point of it all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is the thing now coming to sort of today's, you know, quote unquote action movies, because I do think what you said earlier about the way we break down genre now is much more difficult and problematic than maybe it was in the 1980s, or in the 80s maybe with the start of that sort of shift of genre hybridity, let's say. But I was trying to think about this, about, you know, without going to that place of saying these movies are worse than they were back in the day, because I think that is a really problematic starting point, right? And I was just trying to think of why I don't get, or I don't feel invested to go and see these movies, so therefore then I don't make a comment on them. And it's I have this sort of thing of the machinery of the way that they're put together and the way that they're calling to me or interpolating me as a viewer. Some people love and some people hate. I'm talking about the Marvel movies, the comic book movies here. And I think maybe really it's something to do with something as simple as I accept the passive nostalgia of certain types of titles where I don't of other types of titles. Like, say, for example, when a new Mission Impossible comes out, I will go and see that. When I saw the trailer to Top Gun Maverick, I turned to B and I said, we're going to see that. And she went, oh, yeah. You know what I mean? And it was just because Top Gun was such a massive movie in 1985 when I was 12. You know what I mean? And even, I mean, some of them haven't worked that way. Like Terminator The Terminator and Terminator 2 were huge movies when I was a kid. And they haven't worked. And I've grown up and it's kind of like, no, I don't want to go see them anymore. The Star Wars the same. Do you know what I mean? So there's an element of what I would call passive nostalgia to my own viewing that is sentimental, that allows me to go back or see the upgrades of certain titles, but yet completely dismiss other kind of titles. Another example is that I saw advertised the Ford versus Ferrari with Christian Bale and Matt Damon. I will definitely go and see that, but I will not go and see a Fast and the Furious movie. You know what I mean? So these are sort of internal criterias of judgment that are personal, that are contextual, that I would argue on some level, probably incorrectly, that certain movies are better for certain reasons, and that's why I'll go and see them. But equally, I can understand the argument against that, which would be you're just putting your subjective projection onto why you think these kinds of movies are better. So that's kind of me trying to get a sense of where I am in terms of like action movies.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to kind of to ponder. I think you clearly have a relationship with Tom Cruise going way back, you know, so that's a star that you've kind of grown up with. And what's fascinating about him now is he is seeing a man who you know is older, is your age or older, and older, and seeing what the hell they're going to do next, you know, and how they're going to pull off topping The Last Thing. It's almost this kind of daring himself to do something ever more ridiculous in the service of entertainment. The Terminator thing I think is interesting because obviously that's been in the news recently with the new Terminator movie coming out, which I saw the trailer for and just thought that looks ludicrous and kind of fun. Yeah. You know, like I kind of want to see it because it looks so. Yeah. But what kind of put me off was that Terminator 2 ends so perfectly, and also because of my understanding of Stardom even then was like Schwarzenegger as this character works, and then when Rise of the Machines came out, however many years later, it was like, nah, I just don't buy that he can do this. You know, he can't do this thing, which he did so amazingly in Terminator and Terminator 2. Like, I know there's going to be almost that kind of CGI moment of, wow, this is ridiculous. And just seeing Arnie at that age doing that stuff, I just knew it was going to be ridiculous. So I'm interested to see how they kind of deal with that. But that idea of kind of a nostalgia that is tracked through from childhood, adolescence and teen is exactly what the Marvel movies and the DC movies rely on. That's why it's not about stars, because it's about the comic books you read when you were a kid. and the cartoon TV series that you watched when you were a kid. So it doesn't matter who these people are. You don't have an attachment to Mark Ruffalo, but you have an attachment to the Hulk. Or you might, do you know what I mean? I think so. Also, what's interesting, I think, as well, is that in those kinds of movies, because of the way they're made and the context where they're made, they're very rarely risky in terms of their aesthetic. So I think that if you watched a lot of movies, and action movies particularly, they can kind of feel like you're just seeing the same. You don't feel like you're watching anything new, whereas a film like, which I really like, which is Edge of Tomorrow, which I think we both really liked, which is essentially Groundhog Day, a sci-fi Groundhog Day, but there's enough in it that you feel like I've not seen this before, and it's Cruise again, and it's just different enough, and that was so when it kind of hits that it's at a level where a fewer risks can be taken, or more risks can be taken in terms of how we actually make action cinema. That's where I'm interested. And there was a great Nick Pinkerton piece on Movie Notebook a few years ago about Jamie Collette's Sarah, who makes these Liam Neeson B movies with, and it was a really interesting piece about him as an auteur and what he's doing. So I kind of checked out these films and I was like, wow, these are really good action movies, in that traditional vein of, very simple plot, kind of lots of B movie actors propping up, but driven by a desire to kind of solve a problem through action. And then what's interesting is to keep working with Liam Neeson over and over again and create this body of work, which is where the star is part of it, and you're going to watch an older Liam Neeson get out of a situation that is kind of presented to him in increasingly kind of spectacular ways. So, but again, that's never going to be at a level of a Speed or even a Cliffhanger, because that space is dominated by a different kind of action movie, I think.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any of those movies, and I have no desire to, because I think that if somebody came to me and said this is doing something new with cinema, with any genre, I'll watch that film. If you came to me and said, look, you've got to watch this because I don't care what reservations you've got, it will tell you something new about cinema. It's like, it's so difficult to see that, with the contemporary machinery of commercialized cinema. And if one of those films did happen, I would know about it. So therefore, I can park it all and say, yeah, if you like those films, go and see them. That's totally fine. And it's not against that. It's just I'm not 14 anymore. You know what I mean? And maybe again, the criticism is, but you're being condescending in saying this is a film for 14-year-old boys. You know what I mean? And this is where I am on board a little bit with this idea that we are in a saturated world where so many of those movies are aimed at that audience, and yet the audience of older people has come to watch from that perspective. You know what I mean? And that's the big, laying that argument out, I think, is very difficult to do when people love these films so much. You know what I mean? There is infantilizing culture and that kind of argument, which I do have some sympathy for. Even though I may go and like a movie, any given movie may be good in and of itself. It's more the mechanics around what is being produced as an ideology broadly that I think is the problem.
Yeah, I think that maybe the conflation of action cinema into this too broad an umbrella, which encompasses both Liam Neeson on a train and Thor, is going to result in that. I mean, I would argue that a film like The Raid or Dredd or John Wick is as much for our generation as and I think it speaks specifically to people who have an investment in action cinema. And again, as always, as we kind of constantly come back to, the problem is largely the conversation around that stuff. I watch a lot of these movies and I find a great pleasure. And there was a great Netflix film called Fury, which is a Vietnamese action movie, which is like a really kind of good hand-to-hand kind of set-piece movie. Basically what you'd have seen in the 80s with kind of Cynthia Rothrock or Michael Dudikoff, but transplanted to Vietnam. And it's just really entertaining and it's really fun and it's not patronising and it's not childish. It's just a good action movie. but there's no space. Again, there's no space to talk about that because you have to talk about the politics and the box office and where does it fit and where do I fit. It's
yeah. But that takes the joy out of the watching a lot of the time for me. That kind of joy that you're talking about. You know what I mean? So it's like I want to have that joy, but it's like you've got to go through so many layers to get to that. It's almost becomes, oh look, you go and enjoy yourselves over there. I'll do something else. You know what I mean?
Well, if you ever want,
not you personally, you know what I mean? But you know,
well, if you ever want to dip your toe back in to the contemporary action milieu,
I'll try that.
Let me know. I've got a nice little list.
Okay.
Thanks, Dario, for your contribution there. That was a fun episode. It took a while to get there, but it was definitely as fun as I hoped it would be. Talking about this stuff. And
really good.
Yeah, thanks to Verena and the Polly again. Thanks to our audience who contributed some really fascinating ideas, particularly the one about which I loved, this idea that everyone's always moving towards the peril. The peril isn't moving towards. I thought that was a really insightful kind of assessment of the film. I can't remember who that was, but thank you for that. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with some content from the film festival I'm co-directing, Filmstock, which you're going to be at doing some bits and pieces for.
Yeah, looking forward to it as well. And also, just to say, we may have another episode which might involve some live music on it. So,
watch this space.
This space, I think, is the phrase that we always use. But maybe, it's just something I'm trying to put together for a screening in London that's come up late, which may happen. But yeah, the Filmstock stuff I'm really looking forward to because we're talking to our good friend Mark Jenkin with hopefully a Q&A that isn't just the regular bait Q&A, but hopefully we'll cross some areas that Mark hasn't been discussing with the big success of bait over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, it would be good to because he's got his new shorts playing at the festival, I'm sure you'll do a grand job with your on-stage Q&A. So that'll be probably the next episode, which will drop sort of late November, maybe into early December, depending on how tired I am after running the festival. But thanks everyone for your support as always. Keep emailing us because, like Dario just mentioned, this opportunity to do this event has come up through the email, so we do try and get back to everyone who contacts us. It's much appreciated, and catch us on all the normal socials. But until next time, thank you, Dario.
Thank you very much, Neil. See you soon,
and we'll talk to everyone else soon on the Cinematologists podcast.